We know if any of the other committee members pop up. All right, we will call the meeting to order here at 8:05 a.m. No Superintendent Phelan today. He is out on personal away from his daughter's wedding. It's great. The Assistant Superintendent report we figured out is the item also under old business, so we'll just jump down there first. Old business, we'll go to item B first, the review budget timeline document and committee coordination. Katie put a copy of the timeline within the folder. I also forwarded you all something that was shared to us in the committee budget coordination committee, and put that in the folder as well. Just like a reference, it's from 2018, one we've used in the past, in case that is kind of helpful. But I think just kind of talking through I don't know if folks have had a chance to kind of look through the fall and winter timelines for budget development. Like framing or anything in particular you want to flag with us?
I think the framing would be for the budget calendar. So the budget calendar, of course, is in accordance with school committee policy DBC, which is the budget deadline and schedule, and then DBD, budget planning. So in those school committee policies, there is reference to the fact that we need to have a budget calendar, which gives the community an opportunity to see like the timing around our budget work. And so the framing of the draft calendar, which I think it is a draft, very rough draft for now, in the timing as we experienced last year, that the timing can be somewhat fluid. And so I have typically organized it by the season, saying like during the summer, this is the work that will be completed. In the fall, this is the work specific to the budget process that will be completed. And there's references to many aspects of the budget. It's not just the budget development process, but the summer reflects that we are closing the budget from the previous fiscal year and opening the budget from this year. And that is helping frame the work that we're doing for FY27 budget development. In the summer, again, it's when we find out some pretty important news about our grants, our federal grants, which are entitlement grants. And that funding is very much dependent on the federal budget and what's happening at the federal level. So we always try to keep a very close eye on that because that money, specifically the special education grants, fund a pretty significant part of our expenses or it helped to offset some of the costs that we see through the operating budget. In fall is when there's references to FY27 budget preparation. And then of course, in the winter, that work continues with more meetings with some of the town departments and some other committees. And then spring, of course, is when we are doing a lot of the work to make sure that we will be closing FY26 and then also town meeting where the budget will be voted for FY27. So right now under spring 2026, it says FY26, but that should be 27. So I'll update that. And then in addition to this, last year, we also started putting in a description of the meeting and the timing around when those meetings will occur, which I think is very helpful. And I think it more aligns with the schedule that you had put in the folder, the one that was shared from 2018, because it more references the existing meetings. Whether it be a school committee meeting, could be a finance subcommittee meeting, and when those meetings will occur. And so once we do find out the dates of some of the meetings, we can of course update either the grid that's attached to this draft calendar, or we can put it right in the calendar, whatever way is best.
So this also would go to, sorry, so we have John keeping we're working together on a calendar that's looking out.
Mhm.
So this would be dropped in there already. For the dates that we're looking at presentations, or if they're not, we can.
If they're not, they should be,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm. And so just to let you all know that John and I met with the town finance department head, so we met with Carla Phoebe, the HR director, Amy Dexter, Joanna McCarthy, and Nick Milano. Just to talk about kind of the timing, the process, our initial conversations around FY 27. We had that meeting earlier in the week. And they are wonderful, really like helpful and collaborative, and they want to be able to support us through that process. And so I'm sure that that was the first meeting of many, but we did talk about, and I know that the town administrator has also mentioned coming to either this meeting or another meeting and talking about like the revenue forecast for the town. Because that's a really important piece of our work, right, when we're creating the budget, is just having the information to know what the revenue forecasts are looking like. And so we talked about some of that, but it's kind of more at a preliminary level earlier in the week, and I would anticipate that we'll have follow-up meetings and on a pretty regular basis moving forward.
Yeah, I think the thing that makes me think a couple things. So yeah, I forwarded you all the email from Nick Milano. John and I were on around scheduling him. Typically, we did, or last year, we did 2 meetings. We came into a revenue forecast presentation. Again, at some point in October, and it might be in that very bottom table. Yeah, like, well, it ended up being like 11.6, it looks like. And then we did expense forecasts were, in December. And so now we're trying to move that up a bit, and Nick's proposal, maybe we do those together. It seems like we'll have information a bit earlier than maybe we did last year. Obviously, let's see if the override is off the table for this year, so maybe that's why he's going to get to us earlier. So that date was shared as October 12th.
So when he does this year, it'll be a revenue forecast for FY 27, and then an expense forecast. What is an expense forecast?
So the expense is like what they are anticipating the town expenses to go up in terms of eating away at that revenue.
Okay.
Because that part of the conversation is out of the revenue, what percentage goes to schools versus the town? What are the things that the town doesn't have much control over regarding maybe like health benefits?
Yeah.
Being a primary driver last year, we anticipate being a primary driver this year. And so, once that slice is kind of taken away, what is left, what percent increase does the town administrator envision each department getting? And then, where does that compare to kind of what we need for level service increase, or is it gonna need something less, or looking really good and it could potentially be something more for us or for other town departments? That's part of the kind of black and white kind of math of exactly where the dollars in, but it's that like information on what they're thinking the pie will look like in terms of revenue and that will be in terms of what percent increase next year. If we can get that in October, that's great, because that significantly impacts Katie's point, our ability to like have these conversations on, there's no point in having a conversation about adding a position or even maintaining level service if their revenue forecasts are very dire, and we need to be actually diving into what cuts might look like versus what potentially program enhancements we could look at. Also revenue forecasts. So it was the 15th of October. So. So I assume Katie and John are getting like some of this in advance of that meeting, but I think that's usually helpful for this those questions. A couple of years ago, we did that with the finance subcommittee. Last year, obviously that did not exist. The new budget coordination committee, one questions asked, like this feels a bit redundant because he's probably gonna do that same presentation to the budget coordination committee.
Yeah.
But it probably just needs to be redundant because Amanda's not there. She hasn't had that conversation with this committee. And not presenting this presentation. So,
And we won't have all the time we might want in that meeting to dig into school.
yeah. We'll be involved.
The question on the summer. Yes, and we talked about this a little bit. Have we seen any impact on federal grants? Is it yet, or is this just the application process and then we wouldn't know about the federal funding until later?
So earlier in the summer, we weren't sure if we were going to receive the entitlements. Then the federal government said, yes, you will receive the entitlements. So we were able to see what allocations that we were going to receive for all the federal grants.
Okay.
And so now it's kind of strange how they do it because they tell you what your entitlement is and then you have to apply for it.
Okay.
And so now we're going through the application process. I was in a meeting yesterday with some other school business administrators, and we were talking specifically about the school lunch program, which is federally funded. And the contact that was there from Department of Education was telling us that there isn't a federal budget right now. And that they're concerned about that because a lot of the funding for the national school lunch program is federally funded. And so she was saying, you know, there are some concerns with our federal entitlement grants. Those will still be allocated to us. There will be no delays in receiving the money, but there may be some delays for DESI seeing some of that school lunch money come in. And so those delays would then be passed down to each one of the municipalities within the government. And then the school lunch program, also, I didn't realize this, but it extends to daycares and other settings as well. So I think we just, all of that being said, I think we just have to be careful about kind of tracking because it seems as though during the summer, we weren't sure. And then we received the entitlement and now it's kind of like it feels like a little bit of we're not sure about this other program that has federal components to it, which is school lunch. So we just have to keep on keeping an eye on it. But I will say the one area that concerns me, just talking about 27, is the special education grant. So it's going to be, we will receive about $1.3 million. That's our allocation in special education grant funding. So that obviously would have a really significant impact. That's about 1.5% of our overall budget.
What are you concerned about that one?
Just in case, so if they're saying, okay, yes, we're releasing these federal funds to you for this year, so that's for FY26. But then they turn around and say, but we're discontinuing it for FY27. Just kind of the starts and stops of how that federal funding is looking, then it would just be a concern because it is over $1 million, a pretty significant increase that we would have to incorporate into the operating budget. So it's just something that we just have to keep on tracking and
what's the timing? So the timing of that will be next summer, is that in the spring? It's next summer.
it would be next summer, yeah. So unfortunately, that timing is tricky too.
Yeah. And is there any just there are grants that have been, you sort of are hearing like a stop start, like allocated them out of like pulled back after. So are we watching, like, is there a constant kind of watching one piece of it as well?
That's
And is that where the school lunch program comes in? Some sort of allocated pullback? Okay.
Right now, school lunch program is part of, so when the federal government goes into a shutdown, certain things shut down and certain things will continue. So funding for the military and certain components that you can just completely shut down. So funding for ESSA and IDEA, which is our special education grants, that is not impacted by a government shutdown, the national school lunch programs.
Okay, I had a question on when, because again, I think a lot of our internal stuff last year was. As always is kind of dependent on getting that information from the town and kind of information from the town in terms of their projections. Like getting that control revenue. Where do you see? You know, if we have kind of a 10-15 meeting with the town administrator. Where do you see kind of you and John first coming back with kind of budget scenarios or priorities, or you know, like starting kind of a internal budget timeline, like what are the, you know, do you see the steps as kind of being the same? It's just a very different, obviously, budget season than where we were last year for a multitude of reasons, so I think hopefully this is maybe can be a more ideal scenario.
Right.
Like what do you see as kind of after we get that information, we see as the steps in terms of what y'all want to bring to us, what feedback you need from us in that process, and I guess.
So we will start our budget work internally within the school department, so with the principals and the department heads and directors, we'll start that work soon. And then we'll have meetings, so we already have meetings scheduled with the principals to talk about the budget and talk about what the needs will be. I know that John has said, and I don't want to speak for him, but just in supporting the work, just thinking about it almost as like the zero-based budget approach and looking at what do we have, what do we know that we absolutely need, and if there's any shifts that we can make. And so I think that approach is somewhat new, and it will take time for us to talk about it and to go through that process. But that work will take place in October, and I think that will probably go into the early parts of November. And then I believe our initial plan is to do an initial presentation to the full school committee, either at the end of November, so the second November meeting, or the first meeting in December. So that would be kind of like that initial budget presentation. And then that gives us the opportunity to have a few meetings to be able to talk about some of the changes that we could potentially make, or some of the adjustments that the committee would like to see. And then with the anticipation that we have a finalized budget that we could have kind of voted, approved, and provided to the town by the end of January.
From this committee's perspective, obviously, you. Like, I think last year we did there's kind of level service. Like, as the baseline, we had one kind of meeting or presentation on that. We looked at the needs-based budget after that. And that's kind of a waste of time. It's actually then cut back, and then we did cut budgets and looked at those scenarios after that. Would your thought, given you're doing kind of a zero-based budgeting approach, yeah, really that kind of division doesn't make sense if really you're going to say here is the budget that we are kind of thinking about, whether it's level service or slightly above based on the revenue forecast, or slightly below based on the revenue forecast. That's kind of like the one presentation, and we can provide feedback. Okay.
Yes. I think just knowing, we know that the revenue, although the revenue forecast can fluctuate a little bit, it's not going to fluctuate. So I think just doing one presentation.
Yeah, I think it's
I know in talking to John, he's talked about sort of like doing that zero-based as you're going through, almost like, I'm just gonna give an example, left column, right column, right? Left column is, here's what we need to, here's the minimum that we need to do the school, then we have to layer in, and then if there are things that say, people said, oh, we need, but to your point, well, if that comes in, something comes out.
Right.
Is that, I'm gonna call it like a parking lot or a needs column, would there be the opportunity to have sort of that narrative to the budget to say, you know, here are some of the things that came in from a budget perspective, this is where we are, so we're not, to your point, voting, or we're not, there isn't a presentation around the needs, but there's discussion about, you know, reality of the budget, that this is, you know, this is what we have and this is what we're funding, but here were some of the things that we weren't able to do. So I think it's just helpful to kind of have that understanding of it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
In the context.
In the context, yeah, and it's just more to say, I think it's always good to know sort of what was left behind.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't mean that there isn't a need for it, and
Yeah.
we're not presenting a needs-based budget, but it's good to know
Mhm.
what the opportunity cost is.
And I know in previous budget cycles, just because a need isn't funded doesn't mean that need goes away. And I
Right.
think just continuously reminding
Yeah.
everyone of that. I know some of the items that were on that needs-based budget were items that were on it for multiple years. And so knowing that that truly is something that we would, but it just we haven't been able to fit it into the budget in the past. I do think going through a zero-based budget approach, that we can look at those needs and say, like, how can we incorporate that into the budget? And are there areas that we can maybe shift either staffing levels or some of the purchases that we're making, so that we can still try to accomplish or fund the needs that we have been talking about for so many years. So I think hopeful that that will be a part of the process. And I think the work that we did over the summer, just in making sure that we, you know, this year we are only spending up to what the budget has been allocated to us. And some of the work that we did over the summer and looking at some of the positions that may have been open that we left unfilled for this year, I think that helped us start that process of thinking about how the work is done and how positions are funded through the budget. And so I think all of that work that we started will just continue through this process. And so it will be helpful to be able to say, like, I know for me, a focus area that we'll talk about is transportation. Like, how can we reallocate resources to be able to make sure that we can provide transportation to more students? So.
I mean, I think both those things are great. I think you're right that at some point having some, but you're right, I guess, that at some point having some public conversation about what are the unmet needs is helpful for this to continue.
Yes.
Clarity for folks as we go into in future years. It's just, we wanted this for a while, we can do this, and so, yeah, I think that's great. I do think that the conversation on priorities and even just, you know, even before we necessarily get a budget number, just to say, like, what are the things y'all are looking at trying to accomplish from the priority perspective within this budget? Is it transportation? Is it something else? All kinds of different things. Like, what are the things y'all are seeing that you're trying to discuss? I think having an initial conversation of hearing that from y'all, just get feedback from the committee at large, I think would be helpful too, because then again, I think to your point, you're able to have a conversation about, like, okay, we've all kind of agreed, the district said transportation was a priority and wanted to kind of get through. Now let's talk about, like, what is that trade-off of, what are we saying is fun, to kind of be powerful.
When like Katie used the example of transportation. I think. Sorry, and I got my shot straight, so I'm like a little foggy today. I think so that families don't experience like year to year whiplash on priorities. Like, what I think would be unfortunate is if we said next year transportation is a priority fund. Whatever the things are, extra buses and other transportation needs. And the following year, it's like, well, now there's some other priorities, so transportation is gonna go back down. I would like to, again, I'm not looking for like I'm not expecting us to make like a permanent commitment to something in perpetuity, but I think trying to create this so it's a long-term financial commitment
Yes,
and to something and maybe a long-term financial commitment, not to something else,
Mhm.
so that we can create, predictability in services year over year.
yeah, for families.
Yeah.
And something that John has said that I think has really resonated with me because it kind of summarizes some of how I was feeling too, is it's not good to go from having like an A+ budget to an F budget. You wanna make sure that it's better to have like that B budget, but knowing that you're gonna have that B budget year over year over year. Cause it provides that good, just kind of that sustainability,
Yeah.
right? And like you said, we wanna make sure that the families kind of know what to expect, so they're not having these pretty significant impacts to their kids at the start of the year, so I think that's really important, that's a huge part of like kind of looking out 3 to 5 years.
I think what I can do, work with Katie is kind of those, as she mentioned, the table kind of below. Update that slightly, with some kind of maybe anticipated dates for some of these things. Obviously, we have the information on the, select board finance committee, but the town administrator. Can we talk quickly about the warrant committee coordination? So, let's see. And so I guess, so Nathan, I don't know, or give you know, but we've reached out to the warrant committee chair, trying to get on the same page just around what the coordination will look like. I think they're changing some things from the warrant committee side and some things they're trying to re-strengthen in terms of like maybe use of subcommittees, things like this. So I don't think we are 100% on the same page with them on like what they want and just what we are, what we think would be helpful. From my perspective, the goal is like, how do we educate them as much as possible in a way that is manageable and not feeling like 12 one-off conversations and aren't then manageable, especially for Katie and John, who have a lot of other things to do outside of that coordination. So it seems like Jay wants to meet with John. I don't know if any of you have reached out to Jay.
I was waiting, I'd spoken to Jay, so I was letting John.
Okay.
But I will circle back. I think, I'm wondering if it would make sense, as this actual calendar gets populated, like if we look out and just propose. I mean, so it's almost like if there's a way to take a step back and you look at it and say, here's, we're adjusting this, where do we see the timeline working and what do we see the presentations to the warrant committee looking like? And then to that point, then it would be maybe it would be incumbent on Jay to then look at this and say, okay, that would be if I have a subcommittee or a WC rep or something like that versus a fuller committee presentation. So I think, you know what I mean, like almost like present our planning schedule and then see where it makes sense for them to fit in, because I don't know that there's a lot of extra meetings that we need to have. And then maybe looking at that, it gives them the opportunity to say, well, could we add in extra one, like a meeting on such and such a date to kick it off. Because then we also have the meeting schedule for the finance subcommittee meetings, if there's more details that they need or feel like they want to get up to speed, they can already attend or watch these, but that might be a way to just use it as a framework for the conversation with Jay, just to see, what are we missing?
Yeah, I think I mean, I'm happy to share, think the idea of us in October to present to them on the budget, like we did last year. Since I think we can reshare what presentation we did last year. That was one thing I wanted to see if we could pull up today and just talk about. Struggling to find the presentation we did last year. Budget process, but I think aligning on like what that is to send to them in advance would be great.
Yep.
I just I don't know if this is because from the select board side, select board never goes to the warrant committee. From what I've seen the last 2 years, like it's always the town administrator.
Yes.
The select board members never attend, they never defend a warrant article, they never form the warrant committee about an article. It's always the town administrator regardless of the articles. And so I don't know if that's Jay's perspective of why he's going through the superintendent, and it's like thinking something similar in terms of that's the superintendent's role, similar to town administrator. I don't want to get in the way of what we as a committee think is effective. Obviously, I drove a lot more of that last year. I'm happy to do that if that is helpful. If it is actually more helpful for you and John to work directly with the warrant committee, I guess we can do that. I'm just worried about the burden that puts on you and John. Just another thing kind of within this, and so I just want to make sure, we, or again, if it's the chair, it seems like he's also reaching out directly from chair to chair.
Right.
Which again, is maybe his prerogative, and I'm not kind of like say it needs to go through me at all, but I don't want to be mindful, you do a lot of other things as chair of the school committee. So I think I just love sense of where does the committee see, like who is owning, kind of working, pushing this through with the warrant committee, because I think I'm seeing it as my role as finance chair, and Jay clearly does not see that as my role right now, and so
Right.
I don't know if that's something that's okay, or that we want to actually kind of reframe and say this is how, as a school committee, we'd like you to work with.
Right. The only thing I can think is that, if there are places where, and I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but the majority of the work for the school committee that goes in front of the warrant committee has to do with budget.
Yeah.
But there are things that aren't, that there are things that we weigh in on, in which case I would be involved and John would be involved.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's thinking of it sort of as a global relationship piece. And then from within that, okay, if we are discussing finance and presenting the budget, similar to the way that you and Lizzie did it last year, that you and I would go before them. I think that piece would be important. So I think it has to maybe do with the relationship as a whole, as opposed to necessarily specific to just finance. And that might be why that piece is. And then that's just easy to say, as we're coming in and we're doing a presentation, Mark would be involved if it had to do with the school build, say there's something that as a committee, we're voting on support of something within the school budget committee. Then, well, again, one of you two would be, do you know what I mean? Like that, I think it's then just recognizing that maybe there's more outside the scope of finance that would drive the relationship with the warrant committee. So maybe it's just setting that stage. But from there, I do agree that it's, coming in and doing that presentation. And then if, I think it's ideal, it's sort of two presentations. One, the one that we do sort of that overview, that great 101 you did, and maybe there's something we're adding to it. I think John had a perspective on that, things that might be helpful, and then coming in again and presenting the budget. I think the one thing, Mark, that you do see with the other committees, so that the select board doesn't go in, because I think while they're their warrants, they're the ones putting in the warrants, you did see they would have, like, in the past, Chief King has gone in and spoken to the warrant committee. You've seen the fire department go in.
Yeah.
Some of those cases, some of the
Yes,
bigger portions of the budget.
yeah, staff within.
Staff within that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've never seen the select board go in unless there were sort of more, a couple of years ago, it was a land swap. I feel like they came in, I think ones that are sort of more complicated and involved and not necessarily committee specific.
Yeah, I don't have, again, I'm happy for them to do whatever they want. I just was flagging that as, I didn't know if that was the lens in which Jay was viewing it. Again, it's like the police chief, and so they want to talk to the police chief, and so they want to talk to the superintendent, they don't want to talk to us.
Right.
But the committee side.
Right.
Maybe we're fine with that. Y'all are fine with that.
I think,
I worry generally about the burden that we place on the town, the department staff.
Yeah.
About all this process. I think generally our role is like trying to support and take some of that off.
I agree.
Then
Yeah.
Into the, public kind of board support, so.
I think if we have a meeting and just hear, maybe if there's a piece of that we're missing, or if it's just confirming that with both of us that we meet with Jay, but I agree, I do agree, I think, it's getting a sense. I think he's trying to just maybe acknowledge and see how John wants to work together, but then I do think it's us coming in and doing that work, presenting the work, answering the questions, having the meetings, obviously with you guys in it, we're managing. So let me I'll reach back out to Jay and I'll just check in with John first to make sure that check his schedule and just talk about this, and then we'll circle back and then. So I don't know, because I think they're still, I think they've determined their structure for the finance subcommittee. Or there's not really, for the finance representation, school committee's finance representation in the more committee, but I think just getting clarity on how that.
You help me find the warrant, the presentation we did to the warrant committee last, not crazy, right? We
At the
did-
beginning
Yeah,
of the
before,
year.
yeah, before the
Yes.
budget, not the budget
Mhm.
presentation.
So,
Could that answer that?
Yeah, no, that's fine, yeah.
I just want
this-
to make sure, I
No,
hear
I
what you're
think,
saying.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be dismissive.
No,
No, I think
no,
that's fine. I don't want to step on,
Any.
I don't want to step on toes, but I also want to do what I think the committee is needing the chair of the
Yes.
finance committee to do. And so just like whatever that role is.
Right.
Tell me, because it seems like, again, that might be shifting a bit in terms of what the warrant committee chair wants to do. And so I don't particularly have strong feelings. Just
Yeah,
whatever.
I just want to make sure.
so I believe last year, when we went, to the warrant committee meeting, the initial meeting, which I believe was in October,
Mhm,
we shared the budget calendar,
Yeah.
the budget FAQ,
mhm.
and then Peter spoke to pieces of the implementation plan. And so I don't know that we did
We
like
have
a
slides.
slides. But I'm sure that I had sent those documents, so if you want, I can just put those in the folder for today's meeting, once I find what we had originally shared.
Yeah,
Would
sure.
that be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. I can also go find the recording of that meeting too from last year, just re-familiarize myself with what we did. But I think a request Jay had, which is a good one, is just what would be the agenda? What are we trying to present? You're right, though. So I want us to align on that, but I think you're right. The calendar was one.
The calendar, and it was the budget FAQs. Those were the two documents that I shared, that we shared before in committee, and then I know Peter talked about kind of some of the steps through the implementation plan, but I don't know if there was a document that we shared with them.
Mhm. Would there be other parts of like how the budget works, similar to kind of some of the informational sessions you provided to us last year that we should do around, special ed circuit breaker, transportation?
I think when I think of the list of questions that we had gotten about the budget kind of later in the process, later in the year. I say last year, it was actually probably this year in
Right.
March. It was, in thinking about that list of questions, I wonder if it would be more helpful to go to the meeting and just kind of give a broad overview about school finance. Maybe not the FAQs, but more of like, how does special education funding work? How does school, pretty much like school finance, how does that work? You know, the pieces of the school budget. So I'm not sure how familiar all of the members are, so we could try to do more a high level. And then, of course, if there are certain programmatic questions, then John and And Carla, if Carla were to attend the meeting, speak to the public questions as well.
Yeah, I was thinking, because some of the things that came up. Helpful, even sort of, I guess it's in the vein of the FAQ, but like. When you first come in, like, what's a revolving fund, you know,
Mhm.
what, you know. What's the general fund, you know, sort of even the things that we just talk about, like, how's that funded versus how are revolving funds funded. Versus, you know, because I think you see all of those things, I think if there are kind of big buckets. Of that, I think that piece is helpful, because the one first came into community schools is, do you know what I mean, so I think understand. This is helpful, but then looking at the FAQs that came out and figure out if there's a way to kind of like roll some of those up into sort of broader topics and then to your. We get into questions. If it's our budget.
I think it'd be helpful if we, again, are able to like put together a pretty clear agenda of what we're gonna cover, share that with the warrant committee can provide any feedback.
Right.
Generally with whatever process they have, say, hey, we'd like to learn more about X or Y.
Yeah.
Right.
I
Makes
think we
sense.
could
Yeah.
do that.
Right.
At the same point. Yeah, just depends on. Another one, I think, again, we should have a presentation that kind of covered all this. We should get to us, this is the like level service versus level budget.
Yeah.
Versus,
Mhm.
so, yeah, I think all that we've previously shared. Just, presentation. Yeah, just. Even if we don't have slides necessarily share. You're able to put together just a general agenda, bullet points. that
Sure.
Send over to Jay to get feedback.
I think the other thing that might be helpful. But and we could pick out the pieces around it. But I think on the MASC side, there's a really helpful example of sort of role of the school committee versus role of the administration. And I think it helps to kind of do that. And I don't know if there's, you know, maybe that's something we work with Jay, just say then here's the role of the warrant committee within this. So sort of like if there, and maybe it's, I think he's done a little bit of that, but I do, even if we pulled out that piece, that if we had clarity around like, okay, this is what the, you know, what the administration does, this is the school committee's role within this, and it could pull out the ones around, you know, around budget, around, because I think sometimes there's some confusion around what our role is within that, for people on a piece might just might be helpful. And then we can, as we flesh it out, see if that fits.
Any other thoughts on what we should? Okay, were we able to clean up the FAQ documents we had last year and like this is always that's just so long, some things that were very specific to last year that.
So I believe that there is been an updated document. And I don't want to, I'll have to double check.
Sure.
I believe that there was kind of I don't want to say pared down, but we had taken up those really specific
Yeah.
questions to the override. And reshared that on the budget webpage. So I can double check and
Sure.
see if it's there, but I know Stephanie was going to post it there, and if we haven't posted it, we can post it there.
There's one that's very specific to you.
Any other? Okay, so just to kind of close loop on what we're doing there, draft calendar, I'll work on updating that slightly, the table part at least, based on what we currently have, and I'll share that with y'all for feedback. talk about that at the next meeting. Vicky, UK, you'll double check that, so that's already done, so you can share that before. And then, you will put together kind of an agenda for the presentation. You can know out to us. Probably given we're trying to meet with him in October. Meeting. Sorry, one.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm just wondering from a timeline, we're not meeting again until October 1st. Maybe we might actually want some feedback from the warrant committee before our October 1st meeting.
Mhm.
We can discuss that.
Yeah.
So is it possible we can put an agenda together here in the next kind of week and then share that? Katie, you can share that around if anybody has feedback, they can send it directly to Katie for updates. Send that over to Jay or.
Sorry, Mark, you want to try to do this for town meeting?
No, I'm hoping we can, given we don't meet for 2 weeks, at least get kind of a sense of what the agenda should be for the
Oh, I see.
presentation for the warrant committee and share that with the warrant committee. To see if we're able to get feedback for the first, to help guide our conversation for the first. I think warrant committee shared they're at this point wrapping up their work around the warrant articles for fall town meeting. So they're not ready for us yet, but I think generally Jay has said October would be great.
Okay.
So I think they need to be wrapped up here in 2 weeks with words, comments on the warrant articles that have been done by September, very beginning of October.
So pulling together an agenda for the warrant committee meeting. The presentation, yeah, so that we can review, so we can share it with him, get feedback from John, from Jay.
Or maybe, yeah, that's, I guess, my proposal of that.
Yeah.
Feels right, because otherwise we're not setting it until the 1st, and then we're not getting feedback and discussing the feedback until the 15th.
Yeah, makes sense.
Or we could obviously add this.
Do we foresee to that point? A time in which we would need to meet more? I know we've met a lot because it had to do with the budget, but then looking at some calendars.
Yeah, we're meeting like week.
They were meeting weekly during the planning phase, or is there a time that we would want to do that? I think that it's beneficial.
My thought is if we think we aren't having enough time to discuss the things and provide the feedback, then we want to meet more frequently. That's like why and or that there's something urgent that we want to be consistent. I don't know what meeting on a weekly basis, what we'd be getting what Katie and John would be benefiting from in terms of like feedback from us.
Yeah.
At this, I could see like once they bring their budget priorities, like, oh, maybe we actually want to meet another time to have a little bit more in-depth conversation about those things for the next school committee meeting.
But we can decide that as we go along. Yeah, okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, their timeline is also, they complete the budget by December 7th. Which is really early aggressive. I mean, like that means.
We're looking at that.
So that's like 18 budget, like timelines that they have.
And by, is that warrant committee finishes the budget by?
The
School committee
Oh,
votes
school
on
committee.
FY18 full budget proposals.
Do we know if that's what actually happened in
Right.
FY18, I don't know.
I think
This is
Red
just what,
denotes detailed equity budget planning process, blue denotes expert. I don't know if they actually started to.
Was that may have been, I don't know if that was an override here.
it does say contingent, non-contingent, so
Yeah,
maybe
I
think
think
maybe
that's
that
it's
was
but
And of course, so we're usually working backwards from when town meeting is scheduled too,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
Depending on when I think town meeting is actually a week earlier, maybe this year, so.
Yeah, this,
Yeah, I don't, I
Yeah, maybe
mean, I
it's-
just don't, even from an internal standpoint of
No.
like talking to all the
Right.
principals and seeing how things are going and assessing kind of what changes you want to make for next year.
Mhm.
Doing all that in August, it's
No.
almost like, it's not, like,
Yeah,
that's just.
yeah,
right.
Right, anything else on kind of the budget timeline? And coordination? I guess the other,
Oh, we got a, it's a budget, we did get an application. for Budget coordination committee yesterday, making it, so big if we.
sure, yeah, we can't vote on it tonight.
No, we
but-
would just, we
yeah.
could just review.
That's great. Yeah, we did have the budget coordination committee after this meeting.
Yeah,
You had,
put it to Friday.
yeah, after your school.
Mhm.
So we have-
Yes, so yes, that's the update we're getting,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, so I think just, I guess we do tonight, but we talked, just generally on like what is the purpose of the
Mhm.
committee and trying to remind them like what is the goals to accomplish.
Mhm.
Seem to be kind of a work in progress as we go through.
Yeah.
Some discussion like line item assessments. Time. You know, a lot of discussion like 5-year planning, just great, and good, but then. Was raised, you know, well, right now we're in budget seasons. Now more is some stuff that. That's what I'm not really programming around, having forecasts.
Mhm.
Sense forecasts, discussing.
Because it's a share, committee to share information as opposed to decision making. That's sort of, so that everybody has the same information at the same time,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, and that was
Yeah.
some of the conversation. Mentioned around like. It's gonna feel a little bit redundant, like we'll present it. I don't know if we'll present it before or after he presents it to us here, but
Mhm.
something. Like 2 different seconds.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Great. What else on budget coordination?
Nope.
All right, we are close to time here. Finance report structure, I just wanted to kind of close this out. I think we got a generally good conversation on this. Felt my recollection of where we landed is the kind of cost center reports is one that is easily doable kind of within the financial system. It aligns with SE reporting and the way in which they kind of cost out things. But then in addition to that, the committee kind of identifying their particular areas in which we would like more information on and kind of that top level memo with additional detail outside of the standard report. That's something we can kind of identify on an annual, potentially quarterly basis. If we just communicate that long in advance. Job. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything where there's variance of the county, this, I would want to. And then, yeah, maybe there's special. Are you referring to kind of like just special topics of interest that we might want to go deeper on?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about budget driven?
Well, I think your point is a good one on, yeah, any significant variance. We'll bring to our attention. In my opinion, like this year, given our concerns or the issues around the. Special education line items, last year, we tracked that on kind of a quarterly basis within those kind of buckets that we've looked at. Like that level of detail, a little bit more detail in those areas than what is able to be provided. Cost center and that Katie has provided to us previously. And just essentially those same like areas that were the big budget drivers last year. Within the current year's context, it's like being able to get updates on those within the quarterly reports to see how they are tracking within the current year. To see if they're staying within our updated budget forecast or they're maybe similar.
I think maybe even. if there are areas where two pain points last year, where there were overages, and there were maybe things, Katie, that you learned from a process standpoint, that maybe wasn't in place or wasn't. This isn't as throwing anybody under a bus, but maybe wasn't followed, or like, say there was a procedure or process that sort of became lax. And that now is sort of reinstituted, that helps to ensure that those things aren't coming in late, or that you didn't know that there was a such and such because there was no PO or no memo done or anything. So I guess if there are things that you have seen or you and John have seen that you've changed or instituted that then show how an area that had been in deficit last year, where there are challenges, things have been put in place to then address. So you have kind of a better overview or insight. I think that would help in this moment. So I mean, I know there was a lot of like POs being done, et cetera, but are there other areas maybe around, you know, like at the end of the year, sort of the stipend piece, or it's like, oh, that was a little bit of surprise, but if there are things that you've learned since then, that then show how we might not be in that situation this year. Does that make sense?
It does.
But if there are things like that, that could be brought forward as well, like, oh, we discovered this, here's what we put in place. I think that might be helpful. For us.
We can, I don't know if it would make sense to kind of reference that in the memo section too. Because I think the difficult piece is some of that wasn't necessarily reflected in the financial report, and that's why it was like.
Yeah.
What it, like, it, I don't wanna say it came as a surprise, but it was, how did we not know about it, right?
Yes.
And so, I think just being able to provide context will, in saying like, we know that we will have this expense, it's not necessarily reflected in this report, but we anticipate that we can see shifts in these specific areas in the future.
Yeah.
I don't know if that would be helpful, and then
Yeah.
I think first quarter, it's difficult because it is so early in the year. But of course, if there's any changes or kind of shifts to the information that we need to provide, then we can always look at that second quarter is a little bit better because we have even more information. And then of course, the third quarter is really important because then we start projecting out what the balance is going to be. And so, you know, we kind of try to shift and provide more or less information depending on how the report structure is working.
It's a fair way of kind of summarizing that. It's like budget process improvements for highlight or learnings that
Yeah.
Katie wants to share.
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. That makes sense to you. If there are things that you think are
Highlights.
hindsight, yeah,
Definitely.
okay.
Yeah, I think even just to get around like how work Katie, the department is doing as a whole around budget improvements, like how we're trying to work to manage this
Yeah.
better, not in a situation where we find ourselves. So the three things that, in addition to kind of standard line item variance of concern, budget process improvements, learnings from prior quarter, and then targeted areas of concern. As identified by this committee. And ones I was putting is the special education lines, the sub coverage lines. The third one.
Isn't there also, it was like stipends?
Extra duties.
Yeah.
I think those extra duties.
Oh, you bumped that all together.
Mhm.
We have alignment on that. Moving on to new business discussion of revolving accounts. We don't have John here today. He wouldn't be part of that. Is that something that this kind of gets into next meeting agenda items? So I'll just say we'll defer that for now. Budget coordination committee reports that out of order. I gave that, apologies. Forgot I put this down there. We have no vote on meeting minutes, discussion next meeting date and agenda. So again, our next meeting is 10/1. It's an issue. Agenda items. We hope to review the budget calendar. Review warrant committee presentation, agenda. Feedback.
Sorry, just to confirm, is there school that day? The building's open, this Yom Kippur, I didn't know, I can't tell on the
The second,
second.
no, the school, the second is not
Next,
Right now, we're talking about the first.
the first.
the first
That's
word.
We are in. Okay.
Okay, sorry. interrupted.
Um. That's a good question. There is a date coming up.
The second,
It's the second, it's the next day.
Is the second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Gotcha.
there's,
All right, so we'll hopefully be able to talk about the warrant committee presentation. Similarly, and team will have town administrator, I will confirm with them. That we're all set. Do we think we'll have time to discuss kind of the revolving accounts 10/1? There, maybe y'all would bring to us kind of a proposal of some discussions around like goals and what. Probably not, okay.
I think that will probably require a lot more time.
Okay.
So I would almost, do we have that meeting of last week in
Okay.
October? Right.
Yeah, no problem. The 29th, yeah.
Maybe the 20 then.
Anything else for the first? All right, then we'll move down to, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor? Meeting is adjourned at 9:07. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.